Welcome to today's Connecticut Outreach Training Requirements for Agencies Receiving Street Outreach Funding. Our friends from Housing Innovations are here to go through just a ton of content today. And as usual, we are hoping that this is helpful and useful to you. So please jump in, participate, and just really excited to see so many faces here with us this morning.
Thanks, Molly. I think the waiting room is still enabled, so we may want to disable it. So welcome again. I am Suzanne Wagner. With me today, Sarah Zeiderveen, sorry, I know how to pronounce it properly, and Lauren Peretti. So we're all waving at you, and you'll hear from all of us. This is a training on agency requirements, so it's a lot of kind of high-level content, policies and procedures, and program development content. And hopefully to make it a little more interesting and lively, we have 3 presenters, but we really want to make this a meaningful session for you. We know you're busy. I saw who was signed up for this session, and I know many of your names, all of your agencies, of course, and I know people have a lot to do. And so we want this time to be meaningful, to really make sure people know what the standards are for agencies that are getting money, both recipients and subrecipients. And they have an opportunity to ask questions, identify issues that we may be able to provide additional assistance or support around, raise questions for DEMIS, et cetera. So make this good use of your time. That's our primary goal. It's nice to see everybody's faces. Put your cameras on as much as you can. We love to see your faces. We know, though, that people aren't always camera ready, so we respect that. And we know sometimes people don't have cameras on their devices, so of course, we understand that. But we do have breakouts as well, because we want you to get a chance to talk with each other and network some and hear ideas from each other. And hopefully certainly in the breakouts that you definitely turn your cameras on so you can see each other. If you have a special way you want to be addressed, please put it as your screen name. Most people, I think, know how to do that, but let us just chat one of us if you need instructions. And we do love interaction. We also want to make this interesting. Don't wait to the breakouts or until we give you a poll. If you have something that you want to bring up or raise, just raise your hand. Everybody knows to use that function, or put something in the chat, or just unmute and start talking if something's coming up. So we have 58 people. Wow. A lot of folks showed up. So thank you for coming to spend time with us. But just so people have a sense of who's in the room, put in the chat your name, your agency, location, generally town or can people use. And just the question of the day to clear the deck, because we know by 10 o'clock you've already run 100 miles. Clear the deck is what summer plans you might be most excited about this summer. So I will say that I am in New York City and I'm excited to go away with my niece this summer. So anyway, if you put it in the chat, your name, location is very important. We want to get a sense of where people are from around the state. Okay, the chat is popping. This will be good. I'll have a little vicarious vacation through reading people's summer plans. Okay. Nice beaches. Hiking. The ocean, yay. Ice cream often. Healthy baby and mom. Great. Swimming. A lot of beach people. Puerto Rico. All right. Vacation with the family. Vacation with the family can be fun, or it can be like a work vacation. We have that conversation on our team a lot. No, this is not vacation. This is family time. We all know that. Chilling on the farm, relaxing in the heat, skydiving. All right. Okay, good. Well, that cleared my deck. So hopefully you keep rolling them in there so we could all building a house. That's fun. Jamaica. All right, good. People have some good summer plans. So that's actually a really good point to start off with, that it's really important that we take vacation or take time off or have fun and do self-care. And certainly as agency administrators, which is, I think we have a lot of managers and senior staff here today, making sure that staff also are taking care of themselves. Okay, if you don't have a microphone, and we've learned that in these outreach trainings, you can join by phone. Here is the phone number and the meeting ID and the passcode. I think we often also put that in the chat, but I'm not sure if we are prepared to do that today. But please text, chat us if you do need that information, because I'm going to advance the slide. But the slides are maybe they're already in the chat box, but they will be in the chat box soon. So, thank you, Lauren. Uh, Today's session, we're really going to be focusing, as we said, on the agency requirements around street outreach. Actually, all three of us have worked in administrative roles on housing innovations on programs, and also support you guys in fulfilling these roles. And as I said, when I was, at the beginning of the first slide, is really think this is about tools for you to enable you to make sure your program's doing what it's supposed to be doing, that you're accountable to funding sources, and you have the right policies and procedures and practices in place, and support for those policies and procedures to manage the contracts. And that's where we're going to start. We're going to talk about what are the contract management requirements for the lead agency, and then going into because a lot of requirement policies and procedures pass through to subrecipients, so they don't only apply to the lead agency. We'll talk about some of the required policies, many of the required policies from the standards. We do have a lot of slides, and we're hopeful to get through everything, but if not, we kind of try to prioritize the slides that are first, and they're there for your review later. And then we'll talk a little bit about program oversight and development and closing comments. We also have, as always, about 15 slides of additional resources at the end. And I'm saying this now in case we run out of time, that there are a lot of resources for you with a lot of links at the end of the slides. So this session is really building on the support around meeting the statewide street outreach standards. Um, I don't know, many of you, I'm sure, really know these by heart. Some of you, they may be newer to. The section we're talking about today is section 4, pages 37 to 40. And the next slide has a link. Sorry, let me just move this bar around. The standards are required for all DMIS, DOH, and CT BOSS funded street outreach. They have different sections, and the section we're really focusing on today is the one that's bolded and underlined, and standards for agencies. But we have a quick poll just to get a little sense of who's in the room. All right. How long have you been working with supervising management homeless street outreach programs? So we have a range from less than a year, 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, and more than 10 years. And then how familiar do you feel with the standards, the agency standards section of the street outreach standards? And these are anonymous, so please, I'm assuming, of course, tell us the truth, but we do want you to feel free, like you can speak up. Gonna give it about 5 more seconds. We've got a good people are quick on the polls, finding those buttons. We're also well Zoom trained now, so I'll end the poll and share the results. We have 54 out of 65 people responding, which is a great turnout. And sorry, we have a range of folks here. About a fifth of people are less than 1 year. Okay, well, welcome to the community. About 30%, 1 to 3 years. A quarter of you guys are a little longer in the tooth. Quarter, you have 3 to 5 years. Okay, we've got a bunch of people between 5 and more years is over 25%. So we have a lot of experience in the room. Hopefully, we just do a random assignment in the breakouts, but that benefit of this diverse group of people will, be helpful in those breakout discussions. And then how familiar do you feel with the agency standards section of the outreach extremely. About 10% of you very, about 30% great, somewhat, about half of you hardly, a couple of you. Okay. You'll be more familiar today. We know that if you are new, and so we do have, what was the percentage? 20% of you are new. So there's a lot to learn in the first year as you start doing this work, that it'll become more familiar today to you today and through other supports. And I forgot to say, by way of introductions, that Housing Innovations is providing support to you guys through a contract with Demas, and we're really grateful for the work together. And we have a real commitment to outreach work and have been involved in street outreach for decades, and really want to just again always shout out how advanced Connecticut's street outreach system is. It's a leader nationally, and it's really our honor and privilege to be working with you. Okay, so moving right along. So, why is oversight matter? I mean, this is just really stating the obvious. We want to make sure that we are making sure that for accountability, we know who's doing what, that things are clear, that there's transparency in the system, that everybody knows what's expected of them. There's open communication between different between staff, within agencies, across agencies. Some of you have bigger partnerships than others in your cans to do street outreach. It really varies in terms of the number of agencies and the number of subs, but certainly increasing more, providing transparency. Oversight is also important to minimize risk, like looking at the things that might be coming up in the program that are problematic, things that we have a section. We'll talk a little bit about crisis today. But there can be other kinds of risk, like financial risk, like not spending all your money or spending it for things that are not in the budget. So this oversight is important to make sure that we're minimizing risk, and then really also achieving the mission. And the mission of street outreach is really to help people get housing. In Connecticut, that's the end goal. And that's through engaging in a relationship and the provision of assistance to help people be safe and get into housing as quickly as possible. So any agency receiving outreach funding has to follow all the rules and the guidelines in the standards, and that includes the subcontractors. There are certain rules that the lead agencies have around financial and reporting to Demas and contracting, or contract. Yes, it's all Demas contracts, right? Yeah, contracting with Demas, but everybody really does have to follow all the standards. Molly, were you on?
I think we've got a little bit of money that's still from DOH, but only one that is just an outreach program.
Okay, thanks, Molly. So Demas and DOH, if it's your case, but making sure the lead agencies have different responsibilities, but all the standards do apply. So it's important for everybody, I know, kind of, and the lead agencies are really responsible to make sure that the subs are doing this. But lead agencies also have, besides the relationship with the funder, expected to have an MOU with your agency if you're a subcontractor. So hopefully you do have an MOU in place. You also want to make sure the lead agencies are responsible to make sure that each of the subs is meeting their contractual obligations. So they are responsible for a level of oversight. And I think we've done some visits to outreach teams around the state and supporting them, and, kind of clarifying those roles, that the lead agency really is responsible for overseeing the project and making sure that contractual obligations are met. So asking about spending and goals and all those kinds of things is part of the job. And then again, as we said, really liaison with the funder and also submit, all of the required reports that have to go to the funders. And we have different funding sources. Also making sure that there are clear targets, there's goals are set that are in alignment with the can. So making sure people are meeting the targets, checking in on outcomes. So I think from a high level perspective, really thinking about the responsibilities, really looking at how is this program functioning overall? Is it meeting its goals? Are we making the engagements, the contacts? Are referrals being tracked? Are housing placements being recorded? How is that working against goals? And then making sure we're taking a look at the practice and the services on a regular basis to make adjustments. The outreach has really gone through a lot of transformation in the state of Connecticut over the last few years with changes into the funding sources, new money coming into the system. So it's still, now I think the newest configuration is not even 12 months yet, maybe, of everybody and how they're working together. So it's natural in any kind of program that, there is going to be change over time and evolution, and things might have made sense at one point and then things changed and you need to change it up. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with the program. It just may mean that it needs change. I'll give one example of maybe there's some more encampment activity in your area. We know certain areas they're having encampment clearings, certain others they're not. But if that started to happen in your area and it wasn't, you really need to make some adjustments, and we'll talk about that later. Okay. So one poll before we kind of go into, I think this is uh shows you the poll on the slide, but I'll also launch the poll so you can actually press the button. But you can see the questions. How familiar are you with the MOU between your lead agency and subcontractors? Very familiar, somewhat familiar, not familiar. Do you think the MOU reflects the reality of day-to-day operations? Yes, no, somewhat, not sure. Mm, we have 70 people now. Great. Okay, we're almost at 50 and people. I mean, we are at 50, so I'm just going to stop it. We have 70 people on the call. Just in the interest of moving along. So, how familiar are you with the MOU between your agency, if you're the lead, and your subs, or you as a sub with your lead agency? Very familiar, about a third of you, somewhat familiar, about half, and about 20%, a little less than 20% not familiar. Does it reflect the reality of day-to-day operations? Yes. A quarter of the cases, yes, somewhat, about half the time, no, about for a few of you, 5%. I'm not sure. Okay, may for some of you may not be something that you in your role were a part of putting together, so you may not know what's in the MOU. It might be something you want to ask about just in case it helps you, no matter what level you're at, just understand the relationship between your agency and the partners. Um, And now I'm going to hand it off to Sarah, who's going to talk a little bit about what is meant to be in the MOU. And Lauren, do you have a comment, or is there
No,
something in the chat?
you're handing it off to me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Even though I made
Okay,
that note, I'm handing it to Lauren.
that's okay.
Thank you.
No worries, no worries. Hey, everybody. I just popped some links into the chat for resources that I'm going to talk about on the next set of slides. So no worries if you're not familiar with all of them. I am going to explain it as we go here. So can you advance to the next slide, Susan? Thank you. So, as Suzanne said, the outreach standards require prime agencies to develop MOUs with each of the subcontractors. So, we're going to talk a little bit about how to make sure those MOUs are effective. So, some of the things that we're going to talk about may be defined in your contract with your subrecipients, but I know in some cases, there may be someone else at your agency, right, that's responsible for creating and overseeing those contracts. You may have a standard template for those contracts, and so it's hard for you to get all of the details that you need into those contracts. And so, and then, there's also kind of a level of detail that probably makes sense in an MOU that may not make sense in a contract. So some of the things that we're going to talk about may make sense to put in the contract versus the MOU, but you just want to make sure that the things are in writing somewhere, so that everyone is clear. So per the standards, the MOUs have to address at a minimum just three things, right? Expectations of service deliverables, project outcomes and data collection. Now, it's fine, like when we come out and monitor, if those things are in your contract and not in your MOU, it doesn't matter, right? Like as long as they're in writing somewhere. But in addition to those three things, there really, we think, some other best practices around making sure that everyone is on the same page about the roles and responsibilities, right? Because we know that when you're working in a partnership, having everybody on the same page about what each partner is responsible for is really key to having a successful partnership. So Suzanne talked a little bit about this, so I'm going to go a little bit more into detail. The outreach standards really clarify the role of the prime agencies, and it's different, right, than what some of you have been accustomed to in the past, right? So the primes are not just a fiscal pass-through, right? Demas really expects those primes to play an active role in making sure that the project overall is providing the services that are, specified in the standards, and, more importantly, probably achieving the outcomes, like helping people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness to get housing, things like, making sure that high quality data get entered into HMIS. So that means, as Suzanne said, the prime should be checking in periodically with subs on things like ensuring that the sub is maintaining the contracted level of participants enrolled, ensuring that there's progress towards filling staff vacancies. Of course, those two things are often interrelated. And Prime should also be looking at outcome data and data quality for subs in HMIS, and then discussing any plans during those check-in meetings about how to resolve any issues with the subs. The level of monitoring that primes are going to be able to do with their subs is going to differ somewhat depending upon how your particular partnership and your program is structured. But there is some expectation that the primes are doing some monitoring with subs. So primes can use the monitoring guide that our team worked with the team at Demas to develop to inform that subrecipient monitoring. That's one of the tools that I just dropped into the chat. But don't worry, right? When you look at that guide, there's a lot in that guide, right? Demas does not have any expectation that primes are going to evaluate everything in that guide for their subs. So you as the sub can take a look and decide, what in that guide is most helpful and feasible for you to do. And that role, right, of subrecipient monitoring is really part of what should be clarified in your MOU, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. So your contract should probably include things like how many participants is the subrecipient responsible for enrolling during what period of time for each contract, right? So many of your agencies have multiple funding streams here. You might have PATH money, you might have SNOFO money, you might have UHSO money. So for each of those pots, if you're a prime, you want to make sure that the levels of service are probably documented in the contract. But again, if that's not doable, certainly in the MOU. You also want to make sure that it's clearly delineated, again, probably in the contract, what the geographic coverage responsibility is for each sub. So, for example, what towns and neighborhoods is that sub responsible for canvassing? And then also responsibilities related to the outcome measures that are in your, as the primes, contract with Demas, and for SNOFO projects, the outreach, renewal, and evaluation criteria for your COC. I put the CT BOSS renewal evaluation criteria in the chat. So you know what those things are, but both in the Demas contracts and for the COC projects, it's things like, is the recipient fully spending all their money? The subrecipients fully spending all their money? Are they discharging people to permanent housing? Are they helping people to increase their income? Are they getting participants to fill out surveys, which we will also talk about later? So other things you might want to consider including in the MOU are things like how are partners going to work together to identify and resolve challenges, right? So that might be, for example, a quarterly check-in meeting. There might be a case conferencing meeting that your cans convene, and the expectation is that all the subs participate in that case conferencing meeting, right? Those kinds of very specific collaboration opportunities are important to make sure everyone's on the same page about. It's also probably a good idea to ensure that your staffing level commitments are clear, right? So how many FTEs is each agency going to maintain for outreach workers, for supervision, and for oversight by senior agency management? And then lastly, making sure that the minimum staff training requirements are reflected, which we'll talk more about on an upcoming slide. Next slide. Typical in an MOU, of course, is making sure that there are clear points of contact, right? So who's the point of contact at each agency? And if there's a need to escalate an issue, to whom do you escalate? And then, you're going to be sharing confidential information about clients, right? I think all of the subs and primes are doing that. So you'll want to make sure that everyone is on the same page via the MOU about how to get consent, how to limit that sharing to only what is needed, right? On a need-to-know basis only are you sharing, and in general, just how to protect people's privacy. I think a lot of your cans, maybe all of your cans, have a standard can-wide release of information form. You just want to take a look and make sure that what you're doing in terms of outreach is covered on that form, and that everyone knows that they should be getting folks to do that community-wide release of information. As the prime, right, you may also need information from subs to do the monitoring that we talked about, and to look at the data like we talked about that the subs are entering into HMIS. And maybe you want to review their data before you have to do reports to DEMIS and to HUD. So you might want to include in the MOU things like, submitting data to you in advance, right? All of that should be clear in writing. And there may also be things that subs are asking for as supports from your prime, right? So making sure that those agreements are also in the MOU is also a good idea. Next slide. And then, of course, and again, this may be a place where it makes sense to put it in a contract rather than an MOU if that's feasible. You want to make sure that the responsibilities of subs, that the subs know, right, that they are responsible for implementing the outreach standards, right, for making sure that everything that they're doing is aligned with the requirements of your prime contractor with DEMIS, as well as if you are a SNOFO project with the COC program interim rule. It's the contract would probably also be a good place to indicate the budget for each sub recipient and any fiscal reporting and billing requirements. Although, again, if that's not in your contract, I think those things usually are in the contract, then it should certainly be in the MOU. And then if you've got any resources that you're sharing, so for example, we know that in Hartford, Journey Home manages a furniture warehouse that other partner organizations can tap, which is wonderful. If the mechanism for doing that or the just the fact of the access isn't already documented somewhere else, then that can be the kind of thing that can be included in an MOU, how to access those shared resources. And then, hopefully it's all sunshine and roses in your partnership and you never have any disputes or conflicts. But, sometimes that happens, and it's better to anticipate that in advance. So it's always a good idea to lay out what the steps for resolution for any kind of conflict would be. And then always, of course, in an MOU, I think this is just standard in an MOU, you want to make sure that the agreement defines how long the term of the agreement, right? How long it's going to be in place, the renewal terms, and then should any of the partners want to terminate the agreement, what the steps are to do that. And then lastly, an MOU is only as good as the clarity of the language, right? So if the language isn't super clear and, you know, 3 different people who read it come away with 3 different ideas about what it means, it's not an effective MOU. So you want to make sure that the language is super clear. One way to do that always is to ask your legal counsel to review it. And you know, if that's feasible for you. But also another thing is that if you sometimes having a legal counsel review it makes it less clear because they put in a bunch of gobbledygook. So another strategy may be just whoever the person is that wrote it, have somebody else on the team review it to make sure that it means the same thing to both people. So all right, next slide. So these are here listed on this slide are the policies, some of the policies that are required in the outreach standards for all primes and subrecipient agencies to have. So HI is going to start monitoring on behalf of DEMIS in 2026. And we will likely ask for these policies from primes as part of that monitoring process. And we'll also probably talk to you about how you as primes are monitoring your subrecipients and determining that they are also meeting all of the requirements in the standards. We are not going to be asking for policies to submit to us from subrecipients, but subrecipients also should have these things. So you need to have an anti-discrimination policy that says that you provide services equitably to all of your clients, right, regardless of race and ethnicity and disability and all of the other protected classes that are listed here on this slide. You want to make sure that you have a written conflict of interest policy that prevents your staff and your board from using their positions for personal financial gain or to benefit financially, you know, a close associate or a family member, right? You don't want your staff to be renting all of their units from their brother-in-law, for example. And then finally, you want to have an educational rights policy to make sure that where you are working with children or youth under age 24 and under, that you are who are experiencing homelessness, that you're doing what's necessary to help connect them to school and to educational supports that they need to succeed in school. We know that education is the key to breaking the cycle of intergenerational poverty. And so we want to make sure that where we are working with kids or young adults that we've got policies that clearly lay out what those responsibilities are. And there's a link here on this slide to a sample policy that you can pull on. And then if you are a SNOFO funded project, so you're getting continuum of care, COC funds, the primes and the subs also have to have a policy to ensure that your services are affirming for LGBTQI plus folks. And I have put that link into the chat as well to a sample policy that you can use there. I'm going to just break for a minute because I'm talking a lot and I want to see if there are any questions or comments about anything that we've covered so far. And don't wait, right? At any time, raise your hand, speak up. Don't wait for us to invite questions. Interrupt.
So all of these links that you're putting in the document, can we add them to the slides before we post them? So in case people can't get them from the chat. I just know sometimes it's hard to get stuff from the chat. So we'll add, you do have the slides now, but we'll add the links to the slides before they get posted so you can have easy access to them in the document. Thanks.
Sure.
I guess I just wanted to say a word about the educational policy because I think some of you may be encountering young adults, and there are definitely rights for young adults who are homeless that are important to ensure. And I hopefully we don't have too many families with very young children that are needing street outreach resources, but I know there are certainly some. But I do know that young adults and in particular, that could be a great resource for some of them is to connect them with some of the resources they're entitled to because they're homeless young adults.
Thanks, Suzanne. So there's a question from Sarah Pavone in the chat whether or not Demas has any examples of a strong MOU that can be shared as a sample. I don't, Molly, I don't know if you, I'm not aware of a sample MOU available for outreach projects. We are going to be gathering MOUs when we do monitoring. So we could, with the permission of the agency whose MOU it is, we could certainly share strong examples. We're also currently working with Demas to determine what our priorities are going to be for the next fiscal year for developing tools and resources for you all, so we can put that in the hopper to see whether or not that's something that can get prioritized in the next fiscal year.
Does anybody who's on the meeting today feel like they have a really good MOU and want to brag about it and then maybe share it?
Pop it in the chat by all means.
I know some of you guys have been doing partnerships for a long time, so sometimes that could lead to less paper and less agreement, but see if anybody's got something to offer up.
All right. Not seeing anything, but we'll but please pop it in there if you have one. Maybe we can move on to the next slide.
Yeah, Molly just came on though. Molly, do you have anything?
Thanks, Molly.
Nope, Lauren said everything I was going to say. But if folks have MOUs that they would like to share, please send them on over. If you are not feeling sure, oh, Sylvia, you're reading my mind too. We have them. I don't know if they're good or not. If you want us to take a peek at them before you share them widely, can also take a peek at them. Feel free to email stuff to me or any of the HI folks.
Well, and I think if we would develop a sample or an example, it would be great to work from something that people have already. So Sylvia, if you're willing to share that, just would help move us along, rather than starting, as we all know, from a blank page is a lot harder.
Thanks, Sylvia.
Okay.
All right,
Yeah,
next
great.
slide. So this slide also covers some written policies that each prime and subrecipient agencies should have. So you want to make sure that you've got policies to ensure that any participant records containing personally identifying information, or PII, are kept secure, and that all of that information is handled in a manner that protects participant confidentiality, right? So that's things like people's names, their addresses, their social security numbers, their dates of birth. It's basically anything that can be used to identify a specific individual. You want to make sure that your agency has a grievance policy, and then that policy provides people clearly with the steps that they need to take if they're dissatisfied with something that happens, right? And you want to make sure that that policy is accessible to people who may have limited English proficiency, limited literacy skills. So generally what we suggest is that your policy not require clients to file a grievance in writing, so that people are able to file a grievance verbally, and that your team will do the documentation of that as needed, but that the client can communicate only orally in order to file a grievance. And then again, if you are a COC funded program, then you've also got to inform your participants about the CT BOSS grievance policy, and there's a link to that notice here on this slide. So basically, for COC participants, the process is they first should file their grievance through your agency's grievance policy, grievance procedure. And then once that grievance procedure makes its way through your process, if people are still dissatisfied, then they have the opportunity to escalate that to the CT Boss grievance committee. And then a little bit of good news. So one of the things that recently happened was a discontinuation of some administrative requirements around ensuring that people with limited English proficiency have good access to programs. Now, not to say that doesn't remain super important, obviously, that those people do have good access and are getting served in a language that they understand and that they are comfortable in. So that remains, what should be happening. What changed is some pretty administratively burdensome requirements that had been in place before federally. So you no longer have to do that written analysis or that written access plan, but you should still be making sure that you're doing things, which I know you are all doing. Of course, where you are serving significant linguistic minority groups, right? That you are hiring bilingual and bicultural staff. Now, we know that that is very difficult, particularly in this labor market, and it might not always be possible. So when that's not possible, doing things like using the language line or other interpreter services to make sure that you can communicate effectively with those folks. All right, so we're going to do another poll here. So I am going to launch this poll. All right, so everybody should be able to see it. So there are 5 policies here that are required for CT street outreach programs. So the task is to try to identify the 5 here that are required. So I'll give you a few minutes to.
And the answer's in the slides.
Oh, it is?
No, I'm saying in what we've been talking about.
Oh, yeah.
And it's anonymous, so.
Yeah, all the polls are always anonymous, so you don't have to worry about outing yourself. It's a long list for people to go through, so we'll give you another minute or so. 15 seconds, maybe. All right, so we've got about 2/3, a little bit more than 2/3 of everyone has put their answers in. So I am going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. And good news, you guys are awake, you're listening, and we're able to identify the policies that are required. So the policies that are required are the grievance policy, the educational rights policy, the anti-discrimination policy, the conflict of interest policy, and the personally identifiable information policy. Now, that doesn't mean if your agency has some of these other things, some of them are probably good things to have. Some of them maybe not so much, like you probably don't necessarily need to have a client dress code policy for outreach. Although you might want to tell people that they should have pants on when your outreach workers come to visit them. So anyhow, so I'm going to stop sharing. and move on to the next slide.
Hey, Lauren, we touched on this a little, but I just want to make sure it gets
Sure.
asked. So I saw that list. My agency has a lot of these policies, but maybe not every single one listed, and I'm a little overwhelmed because there's a lot that we just talked about for policies. Any suggestions of where to start if maybe I don't know if we have an educational rights policy or I'm not sure? What do we recommend to folks who might be in that situation, sitting here a little stressed?
Yeah. So first of all, breathe. It's okay, right? We get that these, the standards are still reasonably new. You may not have realized before today that you were supposed to have all of these things. So the educational rights policy is really only if you're, again, serving kids like, children under 18 or young adults under 25. So that may not even be relevant to you. And we have a sample policy that you can really just take and modify as you needed and adopt. So that one should be easy. So that's some low-hanging fruit. I think I think most of your agencies probably have an anti-discrimination policy. That's kind of standard, I think, in agency written policies and procedures. Most of your agencies probably have a conflict of interest policy, especially if you've ever gotten COC funding. So my guess is that there are places where your agency already has some of these things and you just may not be aware of them. A PII, right? That's a HIPAA requirement. So any agencies that are subject to HIPAA should have that, which most of your agencies probably are. I would start probably here. Like if I didn't have any of these things, and Molly, I'll defer to you. I would probably start with the grievance policy, right? You want to make sure that your folks have a way of registering their concerns about the services that they're getting. That would be a place where I might start. And if you really are at a loss of how to proceed on any of these things, we have examples of most of these things that we have gathered over the years from agencies as part of monitoring, and could probably, again, with permission from the agency that owns the policy, probably get you some examples that you could work from.
Thank you.
Sure.
I'm just gonna stop sharing and reshare. I see three. Is everybody seeing three yellow lines that look like I took a crayon?
Yeah.
I think that's something with, let me just stop the share and reshare. Something that happens sometimes, I don't know, by the Zoom thing itself, or
The Zoom gods, our fingerprints.
the thing that lives in Zoom sometimes colors with crayons. So I think there's something that live in Zoom, but now it's gone. So
Maybe
we'll see if it starts coloring with crayons again.
maybe more apt to say the Zoom demon than the Zoom god.
That might.
All right, I think you could go to the next slide, Suzanne. So your outreach programs are working with the most vulnerable and often the most clinically complex clients that we serve as a system. And they are doing that in very tough environments, right? So, outreach workers really need consistent, ongoing, supportive supervision in order to succeed in their jobs. And that is essential to helping them feel supported in this really difficult work. It's essential to helping them understand and navigate all of the resources that are out there in your community. It's essential to make sure that they understand what the safety protocols are that they should be following, to try and really reduce the risks that someone gets hurt. And for all staff, right, we need supervision to help us to build our skills and our knowledge base, to do our jobs more effectively and to develop professionally. So we also, need supervision to help make sure that we're achieving the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, to ensure that we're meeting our funder expectation around things like fully enrolling the program, serving the number of people that we're supposed to be serving. and to, really just in general, ensuring that staff are supported, that they're building their skills, and that they're accountable to doing what the things are that they're supposed to be doing in their jobs. And so all of these things are important roles of the supervisor. So the standards lay out a couple of things that that are required, right? So making sure that all of your staff are getting, and that includes both the outreach workers and the supervisor. The outreach supervisor should also be getting supervision. And they should be getting at least 1 hour every other week of one-on-one supervision. And in addition, right, also getting some kind of group supervision, right, through team meetings and case conferencing and team huddles. So, group supervision is great because it's time effective, right? It takes less time for a supervisor to supervise 5 people all at once than it does to do the one-on-one. But it shouldn't be, group supervision should not be instead of individual supervision. Every staff, according to the standards, should be getting that 1 hour biweekly of one-on-one supervision. So next slide. So
Well, and maybe this is a good time to just mention, sorry, Lauren,
yeah, no
that
problem.
there were 2 sessions done for supervisors. I know we have some people who've been in all the trainings, that we have done some trainings that are really on direct service provision, but also on supervision. And I know some of you are pretty new, so maybe you didn't attend those sessions, but those are resources that hopefully can help with the supervision.
Yeah. And so Shannon on our team, one of the things that we did in the last fiscal years, because we realized that there were outreach resources kind of all over in different places on the CT Boss website. There was training and there was in policies and in resources. So what Shannon has done now is that there's one page on the CT Boss website for outreach providers, and all of the resources and trainings that are relevant to you guys are on that page. So that's where you can find the supervision trainings that Suzanne just talked about, is on that outreach page. So when we monitor, right, we really see the difference between teams that are getting regular supervision and those that are not getting regular supervision, right? So when either the supervisor role is vacant, or maybe more commonly, the supervisor is overseeing so many programs and they have so many balls in the air that they just don't have time to devote to outreach, it really shows in all sorts of ways, right? So, most concerning is sometimes we don't see follow-up on critical client health and safety concerns. Sometimes we see very big gaps in documentation or very poor data quality. Because we know that without good supervision, it's going to be really hard to ensure that staff are following up on the most important housing-focused case management tasks, and that they're inspired and motivated, right, to do their jobs, and that they're going to stay in their jobs, right? I think when staff are not getting supervised, that definitely contributes to turnover.
And also balancing their activities, right? Because staff are going to do what they're good at and what they like. And maybe that's not always doing your notes, or maybe that is doing your notes and not doing outreach. So it's also, people need help juggling their set of balls and prioritizing among, the way too many things that need to get done, but kind of figuring out what's most important.
And I think supervisors also play this really critical role in helping to make sure the team is working collaboratively with community partners, right? So with the CAN, with other teams that are doing outreach, with, mainstream resources in your community. And Sarah's going to talk more in a minute about those mainstream resources. And that they're fulfilling the responsibilities that are assigned to them in the CAN outreach plan. So we've also seen circumstances where supervision at a subrecipient agency is not adequate. And in some cases, the prime agency kind of steps in to fill that void. And that's incredible, right? And we're so glad when primes are able to go above and beyond and do that so that outreach teams can continue to do the critical work. It really helps to make sure that people experiencing homelessness are getting what they need. And also, it's not the prime agency's responsibility, right, to supervise subrecipient agency staff. And so it gets messy when outreach workers are de facto reporting to someone outside of their agency. And it's much better if senior management at the subrecipient agency can step in and fill that void when it's needed. So if you are finding that prime agencies are playing that role of supervisor for subrecipient agency staff, then you definitely want to make sure to engage senior management at both agencies in order to move those responsibilities as quickly as possible back to the subrecipient agency staff.
I also know, though, some of you may be using a task supervision model where some tasks are farmed out to be supervised. And if you do that, so definitely don't want to discourage that if you don't have the capacity to provide the supervision on certain tasks that people need or the kind of help they need, that might be a good place to use your prime who might have expertise that you don't, but making sure the lines are clear that the agency's still overseeing this person's employment and HR, et cetera, but that what is the role of the task supervisor if you do use one. And some of you may also hire supervision from outside for people if you have people in school. So again, that's usually more of a task supervision model. And preferably within your own agency, you are building that, that capacity. But as Andrea, I'm used to training with Andrea, as Lauren just said, these are some of the most complicated pictures that we see of people in our community, and we definitely may need some outside expertise sometimes just to balance that.
All right, next slide. So we mentioned this quickly earlier in the context of the MOU, but both prime and subrecipient agencies are responsible for ensuring that all of your outreach workers and their supervisors receive at least 12 hours of training per year on topics that's relevant to their outreach work. So the standards list a series of recommended topics. It doesn't, say that you have to do all of these topics every year. And this list is not exhaustive, right? So there may be other things that are not listed in the standards that you want to make sure that people get. I won't read this whole list, but it's things like making sure that people are getting training on trauma-informed care. That seems like a really important one. Making sure that people are getting training on, it doesn't have to be like the full motivational interviewing evidence-based practice model, which is, probably more than what outreach workers need, but they need to be able to understand how to help people build motivation to make changes in their life. Certainly harm reduction is an area that you want to make sure that people are getting training on. And then, outreach workers, again, dealing with very clinically complex profiles of clients. And so you want to make sure that people are getting some kind of mental health training, mental health first aid training, so that they can recognize when certain behaviors are psychiatric symptoms and have effective ways of managing those things. Again, I won't go through all of these. I'll just say, I think de-escalation, overdose response, right? How to use Narcan, and how to make sure that they're staying safe in the field are all things that are important for workers to get. And in addition to the supervisory trainings that Suzanne mentioned earlier, we covered many of these topics in the series that we did for outreach workers earlier this year. And those trainings are available also on the website and are hopefully a good resource as you onboard new people onto your team. All right, next slide.
Lauren also worked to create an inventory of other trainings that are available. That's also on the website. And those are things that are available for free. And so there's a bunch of links to them. So hopefully you can cover a lot of your training needs through those different resources.
Sylvia, I see your comment. Thank you, thank you. As I said, we are working with DEMIS to set priorities for FY26, and we're doing that not just for things like sample policies, but also for trainings. What are the training priorities in FY26? So thank you for that input on what trainings are needed. And always, everyone in the quarterly meetings or anytime, reach out to me or to Molly to let us know what the training needs that you have that are not being met by the existing trainings that we've got available for people. All right. So so one of the best tools, right, that we have for making sure that our outreach projects are meeting the needs of the people we serve is to ask those people for their feedback, right? So people experiencing unsheltered homelessness are the experts in their own experience and in what they need, and they know what they're getting and what they're not getting from your outreach teams. So one of the things that the standard says agencies are responsible for is ensuring that there is an opportunity for folks that are getting outreach services to fill out a satisfaction survey every year. And you wanna, that the link here is on the slide. I think this links to the English version, but there's also a Spanish version available on that outreach page. And you want to make sure that you are asking people for their input while they're still on the streets. I know that's hard, and people may not. That we tried to keep the survey really short to make it easy. But you want to make sure that you're asking people while they're still on the streets, and also for the folks that you've helped to connect to housing, right? Ask those folks as well for their feedback. You are also hopefully have people with lived experience of homelessness on your boards and any other bodies that you're convening to evaluate your services or to plan new services. Those are great places to be getting feedback from your clients. If you are a COC funded agency, so you are funded through the SNOFO, whether you're a recipient or a subrecipient, you are required to have at least one person with lived experience of homelessness on your agency board. That has to be on the board. It cannot be on an advisory board. It has to be on your actual agency board. And one is a lonely number, right? So we always say it's better if you can have more than one person. That helps provide some camaraderie, and also makes it easier to make sure that if somebody leaves that you're still meeting the requirement because you have a second person on the board. You also should be getting input, and I think you all are doing this, right? Getting input from people who are out there on the streets in your communities on where to find people, right? Where are there encampments? Where's there somebody that might be super isolated that they're worried about, right? People know where other people are. And then, of course, getting input into, how well the case management services that folks are getting are working for them, and that's a large part of what's in the survey linked above. And then finally, on this slide, you just want to make sure that whenever we're asking people for their input, I feel like, people get asked for their input a lot, and it's often not clear to them what you're doing with that information. And it's super frustrating, right? If somebody asks you for your input and says, oh, your feedback and your ideas are really important to us, but then you never loop back to them to tell them what you did with that feedback and that input, it makes them less likely to give that feedback and that input moving forward, because it feels like it's just going into a big void. There is a slide in the resources section for SNOFO projects with some more details about submitting surveys to CT BOSS. Only SNOFO projects at this point are required to submit the surveys. Other agencies should be gathering the surveys and using them for your own continuous quality improvement efforts. So I am going to pass it off to Sarah.
Great. Hi, everyone. This new section begins with the foundational idea that no outreach team operates in isolation. And street outreach really works best when it's embedded within a web of trusted community partners. Success in engaging and housing people experiencing unsheltered homelessness can in part depend on the strength of those local partnerships. The street outreach standards stress that outreach teams cannot operate in silos. They have to rely on relationships with other systems such as healthcare, behavioral health, law enforcement, library system, meal programs, and informal community actors. Because you can't be everywhere. Connecticut standards describe partners as the eyes and ears who enhance that geographic reach that you need to have to really cover your area. Agencies should formalize your key relationships through MOUs, especially with the behavioral health, hospitals, law enforcement. Community spaces like libraries and bus terminals can become crucial allies as well. And you always want to establish ways to receive tips and referrals for people who need outreach, because the earlier you're brought in, the better. Really, outreach services are more effective when there's shared communication channels and clearly defined roles, as we've been talking about throughout this training. And that really helps ensure that teams can expand coverage and extend follow-up support and close the service gaps that we all see. And in the next slide, we're really going to kind of get into this more specifically. Suzanne, if you want to switch.
Yep, and I just wanted to, I know that this came up when we were just again kind of connect to what you guys are experiencing. The warming centers closing and not really having a good, in some cases, you have a better connection there to connect with people before they go off for the summer. But you also, I think, what we know, so that was one frustration I know people voiced about they close and we lose the folks, but also you guys have built some really great networks and they vary by your community partnerships. So I just wanted to, though, to acknowledge that I know that some of you have been really working across sectors for years and again are really advanced really in terms of who you're working with. You're working with law enforcement, you're working with healthcare, you brought a lot of players to the table. I think though that, always taking a look at those partnerships and seeing if there's anybody who's missing and anybody else who you could bring in. And I think I guess hear and see that you guys are struggling and we're all struggling with an aging population. And so getting the aging services to be our friend is a really hard, sometimes that's a hard friendship to make, or local senior services. And then I know a lot of you have really built out the healthcare. And I think that's been a game changer. So I just wanted to call those things out because people have done such great work on that. And I also know in some cases, other partnerships that you have with like your cities or your towns have been really important. So definitely want to acknowledge that.
Great, so we want to have a breakout discussion. Please introduce yourselves to one another, have your cameras on if you can, and really talk through what are the most effective community partnerships you've developed, what kind of gaps have they filled, maybe even if there's some surprising or unconventional partners that you wouldn't have thought of that are really a great help, and what gaps might still remain.
Okay, and I know you all seem like Zoom experts. Or we'll open the rooms. Hopefully you get a button and you can join the room. If you have trouble, we'll be here in the main room, and just come back and we'll try and assist you. And we'll give you around 10 or 11 minutes or so for this conversation.
Well, welcome back, everyone. Does anyone have anything they would like to share from their discussions? Any ideas they heard they'd like to replicate or experiences they've had?
I'll say Bobby Joe got cut off when we came back in, but she was saying how she mirrored something Jen Paradis had put together around something to hand out to community partners based on what someone's like living situation was of like what to do as a community partner. And
Huh.
would love to like actually see that as a template. Because I was talking about how it's so hard to have centralized communication with so many different partner types that don't actually have access to like our databases, and how to kind of like streamline communication a little bit more. And that template got brought up.
Bobby Joe, if you can share that with us, we'd love to see it and share it with others.
Absolutely. I'm going to put it in the chat.
Thank you.
Jennifer just unmuted too.
Yeah, thanks, Bobby Joe. I want to say we shared in our group a little bit, and I kind of thought about it afterward that like community partners are very similar to our clients, and like that we like the need to like deliver and the need to like have the resources to problem solve with them is really critical. And so when we're stretched thin and we don't have an outreach worker for every person in the community who's experiencing homelessness, that puts a lot of strain on the community partners, because all of a sudden we can't deliver, right? We can't, they don't necessarily, those that are outside of our space don't necessarily understand the resource constrictions. And so that basically the conversation is kind of one and the same around, remaining client-centered and that being our primary goal, but that the resources are critical to maintaining strong community relationships, because we have to be able to deliver to them just like we need to be able to keep our promises to clients.
Great point. All right. Thank you, everybody. I think we need to move to our next topic.
Sorry, just resizing. Okay, there we go.
Okay. Emergency and disaster planning. So natural disasters, public health emergencies, large scale service disruptions, things like that can really threaten the safety of people experiencing homelessness. And the standards require all agencies to have an emergency response plan that helps ensure uninterrupted service, protects client dignity, and integrates closely with municipal emergency systems. As you all know, people living outside are particularly vulnerable during emergencies, whether it's a cold snap or a storm or a disease outbreak or power grid failure. Can you do the next slide? So using Connecticut's kind of template as a base, it's really important to define what a natural disaster is, what is a health crisis, what would a utility outage be, just so that everyone is on the same page about what we're looking out for, what we're preparing for. It's incredibly important to identify critical functions that really are there to ensure the continuity of operations. So not only field engagement, but how would data be saved to be entered later during an outage? How would you continually get supplies? How do you have staff backups, and whether contingency funding is needed? We need to focus on cross-system alignment, like making sure that the plans are integrated with local emergency folks, and that outreach staff are added to any kind of coordination, information or tables that everyone has. And then also really thinking about community inclusion in terms of whether or not some people with diverse needs, such as youth or people with disabilities, seniors, need to be specifically addressed in the planning. I mean, I had an example of this in my other role working on addressing Superstorm Sandy, in that whoever had planned for feeding people who were evacuated from nursing homes left the plan to be MREs, which, as we were experiencing it, we're just basically injecting sodium into people with a diverse set of medical issues, and was really not good for them and needed to be quickly addressed with other ways to provide food. So really thinking about that ahead of time would have helped kind of ease that situation as we were going through it.
I didn't know what an MRE is.
Oh, that's what the Army, the military eats, the MRE, meals ready for what? It's just
Meals
basically,
ready to eat.
yeah, it's
Okay.
just basically like a sodium shot, like, you know, because it needs to be preserved forever. It makes sense in an emergency for, you know, a broad swath of people, but not at all something that you want to focus on people with high medical needs or seniors.
See, never something I never thought about. You know, and I also think about different, depending on what part of the state you're in, you might be prone to different kinds of, you know, like disasters. I think about one client we have who's right on a river, and a lot of people live on the river or in the riverbed. And so if there's going to be a rainstorm and a flood, people are going to be flooded out, right? So different, depending on what your place looks like and what part of the state you're in, there might be different kinds of disasters that are more likely as well, and different populations. So that's what you reminded me of, Sarah, with the nursing home population, like the senior population.
Yes. Yeah, and that in terms of thinking about that risk assessment, it's critical to map out your service zones and evaluate what kind of hazards you have in terms of floods and storms, and think about alternative outreach routes. You know, are certain ways going to be blocked? How can staff get to certain places? It's making sure everyone is subscribed to early alerts, whether they be all levels, local, national, you know, your coordinated community group, just to make sure that info is shared internally. And to have a communication structure with set roles, like who's going to be the official person that updates, has the policies, who's talking to the field teams, and what is the frequency of check-ins that you need to do. Also useful to think about backup communication. Do you need WhatsApp, radios in case, you know, in case the phone systems are down? How would we communicate, check in? You know, if there's no internet, do we have landlines, things like that? And then coordinating with emergency services, as you know, is totally vital. The first responder liaisons in terms of EMS, police, and shelters to coordinate site safety and transportation uptake plans, medical and shelter integration for relocating clients with mental health or medical needs during disasters. Where are those folks going to go? How are they going to get there? How are their meds going to travel with them? And then wherever they're going, are there people there trained to address their needs? It's another situation where I had a friend I had just met, and I had them volunteer during Superstorm Sandy, and she ended up abrading people's you know, diabetes wounds because there weren't enough hospital staff there, and it was just really a level of there's really a level of medical need that is kind of exceeds the standard volunteer, and it's just really something to plan for when those folks need to be moved. And then really the part I really think is so valuable is the debrief and analysis afterwards, talking about who is reached, who declined services, what were the complications. Another thing from my experience with that storm is that the poor people who signed up for the first shift ended up being awake for 36 hours because people either were not willing or were not able to travel during the storm to relieve them. So this idea of 12-hour shifts was just completely moot, in that we really need to send out the second shift with the first shift, whether they're hopefully sleeping or doing something, because that, you know, in an emergency where it's very difficult and dangerous to travel, and that could last several days, you just can't you can't have that all resting on that one person or the one shift who's leading the response. We also had nobody thought about glucometers, and after a day or two, people did not bring enough supply with them and needed to. People were, you know, using their own money and going to Duane Reade, but and that, and maybe like adult diapers was also a huge issue after a couple days, that people needed those kinds of supplies, and you know, we didn't really have those ready. So you know, having a debrief to really go through all of the supply issues and staffing and, you know, all the things you learn is just so important. Not only just to keep it fresh in your mind, but as we all know, staffing changes, administrations change, and if you don't document it, it's going to be lost the next time around. So it's an incredibly valuable exercise. So always ask yourself, does your crisis plan identify all hazards, staffing plan backups, partner roles, and post-disaster protocols? And if it doesn't, now is the time to build it. Next slide. Okay. So weather extremes, heat waves, and cold snaps pose urgent life-threatening risks. In the standards, outreach teams must activate weather protocols during cold blue, cold alerts, and heat alerts with hourly response strategies and shelter coordination. So again, it's important that everyone understands the definition and what activation means. So cold blue, when the temperature, including wind chill, is below 32 degrees between 4 p.m. and 8 a.m. All outreach teams need to be activating field check-ins, and particularly to high-risk locations. Heat events are when the temperatures overall are anticipated to be extremely hot, and the governor's office, in consultation with state emergency management, decides that it's time to activate the protocol. Those are generally activated when there's high heat and humidity with temperatures above 90 for several days. Once again, subscribing to national and city alerts and having that internal notification system is very crucial to make sure that staff can be deployed within hours. And maintaining a list of high-risk clients with medical issues that you are going to check in on, whether they're seniors or have chronic illness, mobility issues, or health or substance abuse concerns. Outreach also has a role in informing people about warming and cooling centers and helping to arrange transportation. Again, there's special considerations. People with pets access needs. So identifying any kind of pet-friendly shelters or partnering with animal services is extremely important. That's another lesson we learned with, where I live here with the storms. I mean, we had to house chickens and snakes and dogs that gave birth while they were in the shelter and all kinds of things. And it was just incredibly important to make sure that people will evacuate and will go to safety, and also addressing the needs of their pets. Also, medications and substance withdrawal symptoms can complicate weather exposure. So it's really something to think about and coordinate with clinics and providers to make sure the impacts on the clients are not worse than they are on other people. And finally, remember to plan for the safety of your own staff in terms of rotating shifts, providing hydration, making sure people rest well when it's cold, and ensuring that people have weather-related PPE, personal protective equipment. All of these efforts together can help you ensure the safety of your staff and your outreach clients. Next slide. Okay. So each agency is required to have a written protocol for outreach worker safety. Be sure that your staff is aware of this and follows this protocol, which really should include a very fundamental idea that everyone should be going out in pairs whenever possible, especially when places are not publicly visible, such as a campsite in the woods or remote train tracks. It's just always better to have two people. And as a supervisor, really to know where those staff are and when their next check-in is. So if somebody misses a check-in, it's a bit of an alert in your mind. We should always know where people are and when we're going to hear from them. And any changes in plans should be communicated. Whenever staff is working, there should be a supervisor that's on call to be able to help advise them on safety crisis situations. And in terms of training, clients are more likely to have a history of trauma than one of perpetuating violence. So staff really need to know as much as they can about a client's history and know if it's a pattern or isolated, what triggers them. And staff may not also have as much experience using harm reduction strategies. They're working with clients who may face life and death risk, and staff needs support in order to help them evaluate the risks and explore options for reducing the own risks they're taking, respecting their choices without judgment, and helping them take steps that are right for them to reduce the harm. And harm reduction is really, again, a wonderful sort of thing that they should be trained on, and we have tools to help in trainings regarding that. We want to always look forward or look back and plan ahead. So if there's an incident, debrief as a team. What did you learn? How did you document the incident? And what will you do differently next time? You saw this slide in the last training, but if you were there, but I just wanted to add it because there are really important links. We'll go quickly through this. The key points here are that incidents must be reported both verbally and in writing per DEMIS requirements. The notification is expected within 3 hours, and written reports must follow within 1 business day. And don't forget, again, to complete an internal incident document and conduct that debrief to talk through what happened, what could have gone better, what you learned from it, and document that so it's available for people to look at.
So I just want to add one thing real quick, Sarah. So when we monitor, right, if we select a chart where there are incidents, we don't know when we select charts, right, whether there was an incident or not. But when we monitor, if we select charts and you know that there were incidents, you might want to gather that incident documentation because it is something we'll ask about when we monitor. When we see there's an incident, we'll ask for that, that incident documentation.
We'd like to have another breakout discussion. Please go in your groups.
Just give me a second to line it up. Maybe you want to just lay it out for everybody while I'm going to recreate the room so it mixes it up a little bit more.
Sure. Thinking back to recent emergency or crisis events, what gaps did you identify painfully, perhaps, in emergency response coverage, whether they be, as we experienced here, supplies or staffing or knowledge or communication, and what areas do you have, what ideas do you have to handle it differently in the future? Welcome back, everyone. Does anyone have anything that they learned or talked about that they'd like to share in terms of gaps you identified and ideas you have to handle things differently going forward?
I know this is generally a talkative group. I know many of you, but I think you get to try when we're back on recording. See a couple of smiles there. No gaps jumped out. You're already feeling the pressure of being away from your jobs for 2 hours. So I hear that. And so we're gonna speed talk to wrap up this session. I think that the the best thing, I guess, I feel like I learned when I was doing direct service and was really using that time, and Sarah reinforced it about right after something happens is really doing the debrief then, and not to make people feel bad, but always, and I think my supervisors were really good at that, about how could we have been more effective in this situation? Because even if we were perfect, we probably could have even be more effective. It's not to say that it was wrong, but I think that's really, really important. And I know with outreach, we have a lot of turnover of staff. We have a lot of turnover in partners. It's hard to maintain consistency. So that support, I think the debrief is also an opportunity to support people through that and help them not get burned out by having had a bad crisis experience. So just a few slides that are reminders, I think, except for some of the new folks, this might be news for, that everybody who does street outreach has to participate in the homeless point in time count, which occurs at the end of January. So it's only June. We have plenty of time, but you will start getting notices in the next couple of months for trainings. There's a special process for outreach that outreach uses, which I think has really made the count much better. And you can read on the slides what your requirements are and using the point in time count database. And there'll be, as I said, trainings available. But also there are some requirements for agencies. Make sure there are recordings of all the trainings, people see it, make sure people have time to enter the data that they need to enter, which is a current living assessment, which is a really important part. And then use that number, hopefully it's somewhat meaningful. I think point in time counts are limited in their usefulness to people. But it is good to know what the point in time count is in the middle of the winter, which is January. And in a lot of communities, they actually do point in time counts a few times a year to sort of see the change in seasonal demand. We also have annual data if we're keeping up the data in HMIS on the number of people we're seeing annually in outreach. And hopefully that can help inform our practice and our programs. And then, of course, when we're in the counts, we're always looking for people who are prioritized, who are really vulnerable. I know everybody has a red flag if they find a family with children who are small children outside on the night of the count, but also people who are really medically very vulnerable, like Sarah was talking about. And then we have a number of slides on what is the role and the expectations for outreach if there's an encampment resolution strategy going on in your community. We know there are in a few communities and that the outreach teams are meant and intended to participate in those and join with the municipality on that. And you can see the responsibilities, and hopefully the encampment resolution leads to a housing outcome, not to just a sweep, right? And we were talking while you guys were having your breakout conversation, that this is a really big topic and will be more discussion about it, could be a whole training session or it could be a session at one of the quarterly outreach meetings to share best practices on this work. That's why I'm going to just kind of quickly go through each of these slides. But outreach is really a linchpin. If there is any kind of encampment resolution, and being a point of contact and coordination with the local safety people and the law enforcement, public health and sanitation, on really influencing how the encampments and the sweeps are done. And I know because we just were visiting in Hartford that they've done a lot of work with their locality on encampments and resolution, and have been working also with Clutch Consulting. And that might be an opportunity to hear some best practices when when we get together on encampments again. I think the most awful thing to happen to people is that they get swept up with no warning and they lose their belongings. It is yet another awful trauma in people's lives, and the goal is to avoid that at all costs. So there's a few slides on tips on coordinating with municipalities. Some things what we already said, and a sample encampment protocol outline. Again, we're really not doing this topic justice in the 3 minutes that we have together today, but there are some resources here and we definitely want to get it on your radar. So in this role of sort of the agency responsibilities, what are kind of the key takeaways is really making sure that roles are clear, targets and goals are clear, performance outcomes and measures are clear. These things are not surprises. What the roles of each team, what's expected of staff. I know if I was a case manager now, I'd want to know what the performance outcomes are. And I know sometimes people don't necessarily tell case management staff what performance measures are being measured on, and seems like a missed opportunity because the case manager has a direct role in achieving those outcomes. So making sure everybody knows the priorities and everybody's aware of the standards. Even though everyone in the room has different roles and all the other outreach teams we've met have different roles, people should look at the outreach standards. Everybody should. Everybody who's touches it at any point should take a look at that set of standards and have some level of familiarity. And then the programs, obviously, it's a requirement to align. Partnerships are really where it's at. We've heard that from all of you, that's been a big learning over the years, and working also with the CANs, and then supporting staff and providing supervision is a really, really important part of this work. Making sure also, and Connecticut again just has more resources like clinically than other places we work around the country to get consultation from psychiatry or neuropsychiatry, or having a medical doctor or podiatrist who could come out with you. I know there is street medicine in Connecticut, which is really important, but the complexities clinically of the street population are really well noted, and it's why people need supervision, support, and consultation. And then, last thing, it's two things is really we want to make sure we're ready for emergencies, all kinds of them. You guys just finished cold weather. Now it's hot weather time. You barely get a breath. And I think we had 80-degree days a few weeks ago, actually, although it feels like fall today. But we want to be prepared for emergencies. We want to be prepared also for crises with people. And then also really be thinking about equity and access. We want to make sure that people who are really vulnerable, who will not access resources, are accessing them. And that's a priority for our work. We also want to have equity in our and inclusion of staff in program design and development. I think, yes, people who are experience unsheltered homelessness can tell us a lot about how to run the program, and so can outreach workers. Outreach workers know what they're seeing, they know what they're hearing from people. So we want to make sure that we're hearing from our workers, that we're including people with lived experience in our staffing, in our leadership, and that we are working to have equity in our outcomes. Those are obviously really important parts of the work. So there are, as we mentioned, a lot of additional resources. This slide is slide, I don't know what number because it's blocked by this thing, but there are many, many pages of resources. 38. This is about consumer surveys. We've got grants management database. If you're not familiar with any of these things, reach out to us. Data systems, the data systems that you have to deal with. Some of you are newer. Maybe this is the first time you're seeing this. And how do you get help with the data systems? They're there. More on data systems, a lot of data systems to worry about. The HMIS mobile app, little update on that. And then we mentioned this earlier. This is something Lauren and the team put together, which is this whole training inventory of all the other topics, not just the ones we've been recording. And there's a link to that, and then you can access these other resources. Here are the other trainings that we have done here before. There's HMIS support on a weekly basis. Sign up. Office hours if you have a new staff or you need some HMIS Q&A. And the next quarterly outreach meeting, very important, is 3 months from today. That's September 17th.
There's one tomorrow.
Oh, so that's June 18th. And then the next one after that is September 17th. So is the passcode the same, Molly?
Yep, all the team's info is the exact same.
Okay. So tomorrow, June 18th, and then 9/17. Are there any final questions? I think we have managed to get a couple minutes before the end of the session. Any final questions or comments that anybody has? I know it was a lot of dense material today. And some of you, it's it's newer for than others. You can always reach out to us, as Molly said, and so did Lauren, and so did Sarah repeatedly. Here's email addresses if you have questions. I did see a suggestion, I think it was from Sylvia, about training on writing service plan and writing progress notes that go to the service plan. We are looking for suggestions of how we can be helpful, and really, just like we're saying, talk to the people who are on the street and talk to the people in your team about what they need. Talk to us about what you need to support the practice that you're doing. And I think we want to thank you for coming and taking time today. And everything will be posted. Lauren's responding, I think, to some questions in the chat. We'll be on for a couple of minutes if anybody has a question, but again, we have enormous respect for what you do. Hopefully this was helpful, and kind of just reviewing what some of the key requirements are. And we'll be talking to you soon, but let us know how, again, how we can be supportive. So thank you guys. Do you want to turn your cameras on just for 1 second so we can wave bye-bye? I get a couple of laughs. That makes my day.
Good night. Good day.
Good day.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Enjoy the rest